Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for some of you who are joining us today. I'm Brandon Bustede, Chief Partnership Officer and Global Head of Learn Work Innovation at Kaplan. Kaplan is one of the three organizations that's teamed up on this series of webinar topics where we've largely delved into the theme of work readiness among college students and graduates. This is the fourth in our series, and I'm delighted because we have an incredible panelist, set of panel members, which I'll introduce in a second. But I just want to extend my continued thanks for the terrific partnership with AAC&U and AGB. This originally came about as an idea to bring trustees and college presidents and provosts and leaders of HR and learning offices within corporations together to have this conversation all as part of a group. And all of us know, of course, we've got terrific opportunities to go to higher ed conferences and meet with folks within our silos or within our title type. We have opportunities for corporate conferences, et cetera, but rarely do we get all of these stakeholders in the room together for a discussion. So it's been an incredible collaboration across the two associations and Kaplan. And today I'm delighted we are going to be talking about the return on education investment, and particularly around work readiness and what we call the equity imperative as part of that. My panelists today are folks who have worn many different hats, from corporate executive and leadership roles to university leadership roles, and even in politics and government. And so, they can certainly bring multiple perspectives, even though today, by title, they're representing particular organizations that they're leading. So I have with me Tony Allen, the president of Delaware State University. I have Jane Oates, the president of Working Nation, and Jim Moore, the president of the University of Illinois Foundation. And I just want to start with maybe 60 to 90 seconds of framing comments, right? We know that there is a real critique of higher ed right now in general about the work readiness of students and graduates. That's true across most populations that have been surveyed on it. That, of course, goes hand in hand with the rising costs of higher ed. And when people think about the return on investment, they're very much thinking about work readiness as part of that. In fact, the number one reason why Americans value higher education is to get a good or better job. It's not the only reason, but it's the most important one. So this is the backdrop, right? And it comes in the context of what we all know has been an incredibly painful last year of a global pandemic, a pandemic that has exacerbated many pre-existing issues of social inequity, racism, all kinds of different challenges that have manifest themselves amidst this pandemic in ways where organizations have probably been more aware, individuals have been more aware and responsive than ever before. But one of the big questions we're going to wrestle with right off the bat is whether that is something that is going to be lasting or fleeting. And so in the midst of all these issues that we have faced with this year, not just the global pandemic, but the Black Lives Matter movement, obviously the conclusion of what has been an incredibly painful journey with the Derek Chauvin trial yesterday, where now leaders, we can all officially say that it was the murder of George Floyd in appropriate language. Here's where we are, right? It has been a really, really painful, challenging year. My question to the panelists for a leadoff is, amidst this increased awareness of the many inequities that we are facing in the US, do you believe that higher education and employers are now fundamentally and permanently more committed to solving these problems, or will the heightened awareness just kind of fade away into little or no action? I'm curious what you think. And Tony, maybe I'll start with you and then we'll go to Jim and Jane.
Brandon, thank you for having me. A pleasure to be with you, Jim and Jane as well. As a practical matter, I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. I do not think that every corporation or every college or university is deeply committed to these issues. But what I do know is there is a rumbling, and that rumbling has extended itself for some time now. My corporate friends, many of which have called me throughout the crisis, really have talked about this not being a moment, but rather a movement. And some of them have stepped up in earnest, and some of them have not. And I think those who have are, in fact, deeply committed personally. and also want to work with universities like ours, which are serving in many respects a population that needs that kind of attention and support. At Delaware State University, about half of our students are indicated as low income, about 2/3 are first generation college students. But I always say they come for a quality college experience like we all have had or wish we had. But they're also coming to change the economic trajectory for themselves, their families, and their communities. So when George Floyd's murder hit initially, my Student Government Association came to me right away and said, Dr. Allen, we want three things. We want a Black Lives Matter Boulevard on campus. We want to make sure that every vendor you do business with shares the same kind of values around social equity and racial justice that we do. And we want an ongoing engagement with our own university police. So from that perspective, that tells you exactly what corporate citizenship may not look like now, but will look like in the future from those who are affected and otherwise enlightened.
And Tony, I know we were talking right before we went live, and and asked you about what the reaction was on campus to the news of the verdict yesterday, and you used the term cautiously optimistic, and maybe you just asked you to expand on a little bit. I think that was a pretty poignant and telling way to describe what we heard yesterday.
Well, I would tell you, when you think about what has happened over 400 years in this country relative to African-American people in general, you know that there are moments like this that are settled in a way that we believe it's just, but then you go back to how we got there in the first place. And I was just saying to you and Jim and Jane offline, while this was happening, the verdict was rendered, another young Black woman was shot in Columbus, Ohio. Circumstances perhaps different, but the result still the same. Another young Black person no longer with us. So I think about those things, and probably more important than me, our students are now thinking about that, because there's no real thought, kind of logical conclusion to, in the Black community, who this affects. Right? It could be me while driving while Black. It could be one of my three sons or my daughter. And when you are living with that kind of trauma and recognize that trauma is generational, it really does impact you in a way that even when you hear good news, you're still looking around the corner for the next set of bad news.
I think that's well framed, Tony, and thank you for those comments. Jim, what's your take on lasting change, or we're going to kind of fade away here?
Yeah, well, again, thank you, Brandon, for the opportunity to be part of this panel. It's great to be with both Tony and Jane. Looking forward to hearing their perspectives and learning from them as well. Yeah, I guess the first thing I'd like to say is I think there's momentum, but we're just going to take work to keep it moving forward. And leaders like Dr. Allen leading our institutions are going to be pivotal to continuing to push that momentum forward. I think maybe a bit naively, we're moving in the right direction, and maybe that's because of a couple of things: pressure, and people now really feeling like there isn't an option to look the other way, and hopefully, again, we're going to continue to see more of that kind of response. But I also think the passion is there, and whether that's our students on our campuses holding us to the fire to do the right things, or from our donors, as we've seen in the last year, really step up and respond philanthropically. They're investing their life's treasures in addressing these social justice issues. And we've seen that not just through the GoFundMe pages, like George Floyd's GoFundMe page, where literally hundreds of thousands of individuals from around the world have stepped up and invested, millions of dollars to make a statement that this is no longer acceptable. And so I think that's positive momentum. We've got to build on it, though. As Dr. Allen said, we've got great universities like our HBCUs in this country that really address a lot of these important issues with some of our most vulnerable communities, and we need to invest in them. And I think our philanthropists are starting to recognize that. But when you put it into context, and I know, again, Dr. Allen knows this data better than I do, but if you take the top 100 HBCUs in the country and you add up their collective endowment, I think it comes up to about $2 billion. If you look at the top 50 predominantly white universities in the United States, their average endowment is $2 billion per institution. And of course, it skews higher on the top end. And I'd encourage folks to look at this data. The Lilly School at Indiana University, another Big Ten colleague, has done some great work on this. But the point, additionally, that you'll see in the data is that our Black and brown donors are stepping up. Our wealthiest Black philanthropists are investing in social justice issues disproportionately to all other donors by about 44% to 6%. You're seeing corporations now say, we're going to get in the game and get in the game seriously. Now, are they doing it because it's good for business or because it matters? I mean, we'll see. So I think the momentum is there. I think we're moving in the right direction. And in my space, where I get to deal with people who are thinking about these issues through philanthropy and how it can be impactful, it's inspiring. But I think we have a long way to go yet.
Yeah, well said as well. And I very much appreciate the perspective you're bringing from the world of philanthropy. A lot of interesting things happening there, philanthropic partnerships with companies who are doing corporate social responsibility initiatives. There's some real activity and promise on that level as well. So I appreciate you highlighting those pieces. Jane, what would you say to lasting versus fleeting momentum and change here?
So first of all, I just want to echo, so lovely to be here with Tony and Jim and with you, Brandon. And, I'm probably coming from that government standpoint a little bit less optimistic because, other than Pell Grants and the meager investment we make in HBCUs, we don't have a terrific commitment to bring people out of poverty, or, I certainly don't want to equate Blacks with poverty, because in my life, that's not true. In nobody's life is that true. But we need to do more and to do something in a sustainable way. I do think that finally business is going to come on board because they need the talent. They are so recognizing all of a sudden, and you mentioned George Floyd. Besides the horror that his family went through, we also have to look at his lawyer was brilliant. And he was a Black man. He was brilliant. I'm not sure anyone could have done that job. He was terrific, and America saw him real time. In addition, during the pandemic, we've seen brilliant doctors who are Black all over the country. So I think all of this coming together has really kind of made business say, this is a business need. We have to go to the colleges where these young, talented Black women and men are studying, and we need to recruit them and we need to fight for them. So I in that end, I'm a little bit more optimistic about the now. I think we've all got to work really hard to hold them accountable so it stays not only for the now, but for the future.
Yeah, and I know there were some initiatives that several of you highlighted when we were having kind of our preparation for this. One was the 90 to 0 initiative, where a lot of corporations are getting together to do things like, especially on the financial services, investment banking side of things, to have policies and guidelines around investing in Black-owned businesses. And I mean, there's a whole 7-point, kind of framework to what they're doing, but they're doing it because it's the right thing to do, and because they see it as a smart business investment, right? That it grows the economic pie when we invest in Black-owned businesses and Black entrepreneurs. And the 110 initiative was another thing that was highlighted around, trying to get 1 million Black Americans jobs over the next 10 years into high quality jobs. Did any of you just want to comment on a couple of those? Because I think they are signs of the momentum that could turn into real action, because there's multiple companies making commitments together. It's not just one who's out on a limb, right? There's a reinforcement of this. I'm seeing it a lot in the work that I do, where universities, for example, are demanding certain standards, and I'm delighted to see it, right? Because it forces all of us to up our game in terms of what we're doing here. But did any of you want to comment more on either those initiatives or other things that you've seen?
Well, Brandon, just in the context of 110, because I think it actually goes to Jim's point around African-American philanthropy. So I do think there are two pieces to this puzzle. The first is dealing with systemic racism head on and making sure that we are all a part of that solution-driven process. But I also think that African-Americans who have shown some level of success, who have reached great heights, and whether they want to or not, are representing that community in a much bigger and broader way than sometimes they might even realize. They are stepping up. The 110 initiative is really founded by a guy named Ken Frazier, who I think you all know is a chairman of Merck, an African-American man who has, from the beginning, talked with great power around what is happening over the last 18 months. And 110 is 1 million Black jobs in 10 years. So when you have that coming from the likes of that kind of corporate power, it's one thing. When you have it coming from the likes of that kind of corporate power and the man in charge happens to be a Black man, that does send great signals. The same could be true for Ken Chenault, former CEO of American Express, and how they galvanized a number of CEOs from all different backgrounds and abilities, but a lot of African Americans as well, around the voting rights initiatives in Georgia. So I do think that there is something brewing throughout our community. W.B. Du Bois, famed scholar of the early 20th century, talked about the talented 10th and suggested that there'd be 10% of the African American community that would reach some level of success in every field of human endeavor. But that was not what was most important. What was most important is that those 10% would find a way to lift up the masses. And I think we haven't always reached back in that way to lift up the masses, in addition to fighting against systemic racism and those kinds of things. So I think you are seeing something brewing here that is coming not only from white allies and the like, but also from those people of color who reach significant achievement, understand the notion that to whom much is given, much is expected.
Yeah, and I think, look, I think the initiative is really important, because when we see people like the CEO of Merck, something's wrong in our country when there are only 5 Black CEOs in the Fortune 500. I mean, when Ursula Burns decided to retire and step down, we all were like, oh my God, she's the only Black woman CEO in the Fortune 500. What happens now? So I think it's really, and I think both of the movements, although not connected officially, really go together, because most Americans don't understand with 90 to 0, it means there's a 90% wealth gap between white and Black Americans. That's wrong. That talks about maybe we're doing a little bit better getting Blacks to get a bachelor's degree and beyond, especially with the McNair program, getting PhDs. It's wonderful. All that is good, but we're not having the mobility within work to get them the pay that they need. We have lots of conversations about pay equity with men and women. I think we need to start talking about mobility and pay equity with people of color.
And Brandon, I may offer a comment or two on this point, but more at a local level here in Illinois, in our community of Chicago. We've actually been working with community leaders as well as our donors, but really thinking about this problem as a state issue that needs to be addressed at the highest level. So we're talking about the governor being involved, our state legislators being involved, and hundreds of millions of dollars being put into an enterprise that the University of Illinois spearheaded called the Discovery Partners Institute. I'd encourage everybody to take a look at it, because I think it's a model that could be scaled. And part of this initiative, it's designed really to think about how to upskill our workforce in the state of Illinois around technology innovation. A lot of the traditional component parts of an enterprise like this, with research, applied research in particular, but really trying to build a technology ecosystem here in Illinois. And so, when you think about that, oftentimes it's research and faculty and scholarship, maybe PhD programs, postdocs. We've actually tried to pivot a little bit more and get down to a community level where DPI is working with individuals from middle school through their career in programs, working with CPS, for instance, trying to make sure that, and we're targeting the Black and brown community in Chicago. I mean, that's very clear. so that we can make sure that students have access to things like college level computer science and data science courses in junior high school and in high school, the junior senior year for that program in particular, for free. We're also building out programs to train K through 12 teachers so that they're upskilled and have the ability to really understand technology application, and teach kids at a young age these skills so that they are workforce ready. If they don't come to the University of Illinois, that's fine. They're going to have skills that they can lever and be part of the workforce. So back to creating opportunities that will allow some of us, our disadvantaged communities that have been held out or locked out of opportunities in technology. We're going to try to address some of that through this program. And just getting off the ground, but literally hundreds of millions of dollars invested by not only the state, but $10 million, for instance, from a family foundation, the Pritzker Foundation in Illinois, to really create this tech talent lab that focuses on these wonderful students who are going to be our future.
Yeah, and as a segue to what each of you are, talking about now, I mean, I haven't been with a corporate leader, for example, in the last year. Obviously, I'm talking about Zoom when I say with corporate leaders here, that hasn't talked about how they feel they're failing, right? Even despite well-intentioned efforts around building a real diversity talent pipeline. And quite frankly, I've been with a lot of university leaders who are saying the same things. We certainly have institutions that are very diverse institutions that enroll a diverse population socioeconomically, right? When you look at the top of higher ed and our elite institutions, which always garner the lion's share of the news and the attention and the mindscape and all that kind of stuff, look, by and large, they're not very diverse institutions. They're especially not doing very well in socioeconomic diversity. They're not doing really well in racial diversity. So higher ed and employers are grappling with some of the same challenges. There's been a lot of well-intentioned efforts, but frankly, not a lot that have moved the needle. So as you all step back and scan the various efforts that you've either seen or been involved with or are observing, right? I'm curious, which do you believe are the most promising, right? And then what aspects specifically do you think are the ingredients for success there, right? And I know we've started to talk about a few new initiatives, but I would just love your thoughts on, the key ingredients for success, the key initiatives that you see or are aware of that are really moving the needle here as we help the folks that are joining us today think about the kinds of things that they can and invest more time and energy in. So, Tony, maybe I'll have you lead it off again on this question as well.
So, Brandon, well, let me give you one factoid, particularly as it relates to HBCUs. So HBCUs are 3% of all colleges and universities in the country, 3%. We are still producing nearly 25% of all Black graduates in the country.
Wow.
So when I'm in front of corporate leaders, and because normally what I hear is we have lots of different programs, Tony, it's just very difficult finding Black talent. My common retort is you are not looking hard enough. There is literally no field of discipline where you can't find that talent if you're not looking hard enough. That's literally 300,000 students of color that we are putting in the marketplace every year. So and across a wide array of disciplines. So what works? One, connecting with those partners in the same way that there are the cream of the crop among the majority institutions. I know that my colleagues, and I have great colleagues at Morehouse and Spelman and Howard and right? But when we are in these moments, oftentimes those are the first folks that folks go to, but they don't understand that there are also 100 other HBCUs, many of which are in your respective communities, producing similarly situated results. So at Delaware State, what we've tried to do is connect with our primary partners based on the industry needs. A lot of it has to do with financial services and bio-life sciences. And as we've talked to them, and we've had to do some thinking too, changing our traditional career services model to really think about career pathways. We do that two ways. The first is has a longer tail on it. We actually started an early college high school 5 years ago, where high school students can gain up to 60 credits before they're ever admitted into any college or university. We have 50% of those students coming to the university Delaware State University, but others go all over the place. And that's a good talent pipeline. So a little bit of that is growing our own around those disciplines. The second piece is, as we think about our career pathways program, is having our corporate partners come to us earlier. So we are not only largely first generation college students, these students are likely first generation corporate. Well, they will be first generation government. So you really have to build what I think is an ongoing small network with some of these corporate partners. So one, they get to see them openly and can ask some questions that they might not be able to ask or be fearful of asking while they're in an internship process. And two, you really get to understand the grit and determination and quality of the student before they're sitting across from you at the interview table. It's also, so the learning is two-way. As we've started that, particularly with JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America, we've seen some really good success around connecting those relationships. Are we where we want to be yet? No, but we really have to say, if you are a real corporate citizen and very much interested in a diverse talent pipeline, you can't look at our rising juniors and rising seniors when it's time for internship possibilities. When they get admitted to the university, we have to connect them with you right at that moment and develop those relationships throughout the life cycle.
Those are all hugely important points, Tony. And it's, you know, on the last one, right, about employers being able to pull various kinds of whatever we call them, internship, co-op, you know, apprenticeship, shadowing opportunities forward, the value that has, and this plays out in the research I was involved with in my days at Gallup, that not only does an internship matter, right, the longer you had one matters, the earlier you had one in your college career matters, right? So we've got the ingredients of success there. It's a question of the commitment of the institution really making that a priority, putting some, you know, effort, some good old elbow grease behind going out and building partnerships with companies and thinking of that as core to the academic mission, not just as a tangential nice to have. And so I'm just, you know, I think you've reflected that really well, and I'm enthused by other institutions that have started to make those kinds of moves and commitments. So, Jim, what would you say in terms of the promising practices that you've got your eye on?
Well, you know, I appreciate the commentary about the students and the graduates that are available in the marketplace that may be overlooked or have not historically been given the opportunities that they rightfully deserve. And I think that you know, making a commitment to continue to you know, establishing priorities like that on the recruitment side is important. But one of the things I've been you know, really encouraged by over the last year is the not just talk, but the action focused on recruitment of faculty and leaders in higher education, faculty and leaders of color. Not just, you know, our HBCUs are wonderful resources and incredibly talented leaders. We need to see more of those individuals in our predominantly white institutions and you know, institutions like our University of Illinois with, you know, 90,000 students in our system, and our chancellor at UIUC is amazing, Dr. Robert Jones. And having those faces and commitment to having people like Dr. Jones and others leading our premier research universities that educate, in, you know, many cases, most of the students in the country, is really going to be important. And we're seeing efforts like that being mobilized. And it's been exciting. Our donors are getting excited about it and, you know, investing in it. We're faculty initiatives likewise. So those are some things that need to continue to be advanced and not just talked about, but you know, real money, real dollars, real goals being put in place to see those things realized.
Yeah, Jane, what would you add? I know you're always thinking with your former federal government hat on, and you're thinking through a lot of lenses. But I'm curious what your take is on best practices, and it might be a mix of things you've seen from higher ed or corporate or for government. But love to hear your thoughts.
Well, number one, I think, you know, I don't want to move away from talking about HBCUs without talking about the thing that is often left off the table, and that's the leadership that they teach. I mean, the sororities and fraternities at HBCUs are still entities that I go to when I'm doing a community service project, because they can mobilize people to do social service projects faster than anyone I know. I wish we could get them on political campaigns like that, because literally they can do anything. But I think in terms of promising practices with corporate, in conversations with both the U.S. Chamber and with SHRM, there's a real commitment now to not hire for any position unless there's a diverse pool. And that's where we can really make a difference, because if people are included in the pool of consideration, they can compete. The problem is they haven't been recruited before. And I do think, I think with Johnny Taylor at SHRM, there's a real effort to kind of do a different kind of recruitment, not to just go to the company, the CEO's alma mater, but to really look, if I want diverse people, I need to go to HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions and tribal institutions. I think that's a growing trend. And I think it's going to stick, because I have spoken to 3 or 4 HR people in the last 3 months, again, on Zoom, but they're like, wow, I had never been to fill in the blank before. The program is unbelievable. And the program is education or engineering or pre-med or anything. It's really interesting the way they're learning how rich the field is in higher education.
Yeah,
Hey,
one of
Brandon,
the, go ahead,
can I
Tony, yeah.
jump in, because Jane made a great point here, particularly as it relates to those corporations that are serious about this. We just announced with United Airlines last week that we would be the first HBCU partnering with them on their announcement around training 5,000 pilots over the next several years, half of which will be women and people of color. Now, they have relationships with other aviation schools, but we are the first HBCU. And that is important to us because Delaware State produces more Black pilots than any other place in the country, but we are not well known for so doing. So when we had the opportunity, after we actually connected with United by JP Morgan Chase executive, when we had the opportunity to be connected with them, a lot of it was just the ability to tell our story. So when Jane talks about many times corporations come in and say, wow, this is the first time I've been to a place. Well, recognize that, many of the people that you are seeing on TV, one of which is your Vice President of the United States, started their careers at an HBCU. So there is something to, again, I told you, quality college experience, but there is something else they're chasing that we think we can give in a different way than anybody else in the country.
Well, I always learn something new in these panels, but now I know several new stats thanks to what you've shared, Tony, including the pilot production from Delaware State. So the next time I run into any of the airlines, if I'm ever flying again, I'm going to make sure my airline, American, knows that they ought to be recruiting out of Delaware State too. So, on these points about high impact practices, and we've talked about internship and work connected opportunities. There were a couple interesting data points that I've really been chewing on in various ways. One, I wrote about in a recent Forbes article, which I mentioned to each of these panelists here, about fresh data from currently enrolled college students. And one of the interesting pieces of this survey that came out, it was part of the Inside Higher Ed Student Voice Initiative that is being run by College Pulse as the survey partner and sponsored by Kaplan. But this was a survey of 2,000 current college students about a month ago. And the one finding that really caught my attention was that non-white students are more than twice as likely to say they want a virtual internship or to eventually be hired into a virtual job upon graduation. Now, there's a lot that we could potentially unpack around that data, but one of the things in the pandemic that's happened is that almost all internships went virtual, and a lot of our jobs went virtual, right? Any job that could go virtual has essentially gone virtual. And there's going to be positive and negative things from that. But what was interesting to me as I sat in that data, right? I mean, it could say a lot of things. It could say non-white students actually want a virtual internship because they don't want to deal with the microaggressions and racism that happens in a workplace, right? You could also just say that it's a preference, and knowing that preference, whatever the reasons are behind it, it's something we can all get behind, right? Is to embrace more virtual internships and virtual jobs for non-white employees or students. And then the other point I want to bring into this is a separate piece of data, but it's part of this equity issue we have around internships, right? We know a lot of college students get internships through family connections and professional networks. We know a lot of them can afford to do unpaid internships because they don't have to make money over the or whatever the situation is. I was stunned to realize that 67% of all colleges and universities in the United States do not have any funds available for students to do unpaid or low paid internships. Now, I don't want to take employers off the hook here because they should be paying for their internships, right? First and foremost. But for universities, and Jim, I'll turn to you from a philanthropic perspective. I can't think of many things that I would be more successful raising money for. This is just, me talking here, than funds to support unpaid and low paid internships for students that can't afford them. So I just thought I'd have each of you kind of comment on this desire for virtual internships and virtual jobs among non-white students, and then the idea that college universities and employers together could change the game on unpaid and low paid internships. Curious what you think. I'll start with you, Jim.
Yeah, no, I think that certainly when you look at ways in which philanthropy can impact the growing access and opportunity gap that exists, when you can provide those kinds of resources to your students, in addition to the financial assistance that allows them to go to college, right? I mean, many of our students in some of our institutions have to work in the summer and earn money to try to support their education during the academic year. So, these are the kinds of initiatives that can be appealing to donors if they know about them. And I think we need to do a better job in our space of making sure that that conversations like these occur and that donors are aware of these opportunities to invest strategically to help make sure that not only the student can make some money, but get the experience that would allow them to be more competitive in a marketplace after graduation. Because you're right, when you think about the students who have the best internships and have access to them, there's politics at play, there's socioeconomic issues at play, and when we have large populations of students who are funded through our state and need-based programs, that the need doesn't stop at the end of the academic year, that those summer programs and experiential learning opportunities are relevant. So yeah, I think it's a great point to be made, and one we need to take some responsibility to try to advance.
One of the comments that just came in on chat, Jane, was that it says government, Fed, state, local is one of the sectors that most frequently offers unpaid internships. Do you have a magic wand for fixing that one?
Well, absolutely. First of all, accept the guilt, right? I mean, and my office was one of the guiltiest. We had lots of interns and they were not paid. The federal government, the Senate and the House are getting a little bit better. There are members that pay on both sides of the aisle, and people should look at that. But I think what we need to look at is what can we do in the short and the immediate, and we could re-examine work study. I mean, think about using work study in a different way to get people, not necessarily with government, but I think government is a big employer, and it makes sense to have people have a little bit of experience in state or local government, particularly if they don't have to travel. Coming to DC is an expense on its own. But thinking about how do we use that work study money to be a match to business, to say, look, I'll put up this much in work study, you pay the rest. So we make it more attractive, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses to be able to afford to pay their interns, and do the same with government, make those offices match. But I really think to get the movement going, to get the scale that we need for these internships, I think we need to start looking at work study. And I just want to go back for a second about the poll results. It really bothered me when I heard that, and I thought, why? And then I remembered. And, everybody on this call has been the only in a meeting at one time. I was the only woman, you were the only people of color. Brendan, you might have been the only person, from your neck of the woods or whatever, and how hard that is. And it's hard even when you're an adult with accomplishment. But think of how hard that is when you're 18 years old and you haven't really been trained for, what do you say when people say, how do you braid your hair like that? And I've heard people ask those questions of interns in meetings, disgraceful as it is, but a real effort for those young people to be able to deal with those answers, not only personally, but professionally.
Lots of good comments. I'm a huge fan of incentives that, support 50-50 investment of employers, especially small and medium businesses, because when I work with universities, most of them have partnerships with the largest employer in their area, right? The Fortune 500 or whatever. Like, those are the obvious ones, but where all the low-hanging fruit is for internships for students, and I would argue really valuable ones, are the small and medium-sized employers that aren't really on the radar, right? I was one of those when I was running a startup in the Boston area, and Northeastern's co-op office found me. I didn't look for them. They reached out to me. I don't know how they found me, but they did. And we ended up having 17 co-op students over the 11 years that I was running that organization. Here's the point. I only had about 20 employees when I had my first co-op student from Northeastern. They were 1/20th of my workforce. She made a huge impact on our organization, more so than if we had been a 2,000 person organization. So, but incentivizing those small and medium-sized businesses, right, where there's some, a matching grant or something like that would go a long way. Tony, from the university perspective, obviously, Delaware State, you could comment from that perspective, or more broadly across higher ed. Part of this is working with employers more, but, do you think there's promise in capital campaign strategies that include things like scholarships for internships or things like that? What are your thoughts?
I think, well, just from a Delaware State perspective, a lot of our success in fundraising is around internships and scholarships. So I think there is a recognition, at least in our area, that not only do they need the financial support to continue their education, they need real world opportunities as well. So we see a lot more of that than we do what you might think of as more traditional kind of philanthropy for us. Having said that, the one thing that brought to my mind as Jane was speaking was the AmeriCorps program. I do think that there's a unique opportunity for universities and the AmeriCorps program to be much more closely connected than they are today. Some of that has to do with the restrictions around AmeriCorps. Some of that has to do with old paradigms in higher ed. But I think the opportunity for you to extend some sort of paid public service experience that puts a little money in your pocket and also helps you with your education while you're at an institution doing something that's greater than yourself is important to the spirit of what college life is all about and how it might prepare you for the future as well. So I know that there'll be changes with the AmeriCorps program here coming up, but I would hope that we could extend ourselves. And I would say this more as much for the universities as I would for AmeriCorps, extend ourselves a little bit more to each other, because I do think there's real promise that we are missing along those lines.
Brandon, if I might, there was a point made in the Q&A about the opportunity that we have on our university campuses to create some internships and opportunities for students to get internships on our university campuses. And I wanted to just mention something that we've been working on in our sector in university advancement. As I mentioned before the call, I serve on the board of the Council for Aid and Support to Education, CASE, and CASE has really taken on this challenge to diversify our pipeline of future employees in our work. And we have a Minority Advancement Institute that we run on an annual basis to support professionals who are mid-career professionals. But we also have an internship program, a summer internship program, which is focused on getting students from underrepresented background, more women in the business and leadership positions. And it's been wonderful. We can provide a paid internship experience on our campuses in a sector that has right now, tremendous amount of need for more faces of color in it. When you look at the changing face and color of our institutional alumni basis. So, there are things like that we can do on our own university campuses that can create opportunities for some of these students.
Yeah, terrific point. So just an encouragement to our audience. We've got 15 minutes remaining. We got plenty of time for Q&A. So please feel free to submit some questions. I'll certainly field them to the panel as well. So I'm just going to read a couple here and see what we've got so far. Thank you for submitting the ones that are already in there. So this is an interesting question about the person says, my question is in regards to how we go about defining educational return on investment. Do you know of a metric that calculates the combined value of the academic, professional, social, and personal returns on a higher ed investment? If such a metric existed, do you think higher ed institutions would welcome such a thing? And I'll just comment very quickly from the work that I did at Gallup around the Gallup Purdue Index. It wasn't quite this in terms of the question, but some of the things that we were measuring among college alumni. This was the largest representative study of college degree holders in the United States. We were measuring things like the degree to which they were thriving in their overall well-being. We were measuring various aspects of their work, right? The degree to which they were engaged in their job, not simply how much money they made, although earnings was certainly part of the equation as well. And so in a way, it was an interesting mix of what I kind of call qualitative and quantitative metrics. Yes, asked about earnings and certain pieces like that, but also qualitative things like the degree to which they evaluate their lives on multiple dimensions, and also the quality of the work that they're in. So not going to suggest that's the perfect end all be all measure, but as you think about this question, are there metrics that you like better than others? Are there new metrics that I don't know, Tony, you would welcome being measured on? I know there's been plenty of talk about college scorecards and certain things like that, and plenty of controversy about some of the metrics suggested, but which ones do you like? Which ones would you like to see more of? Would love some of your thinking on that. And thanks for the good question.
I think for me, they're the same that we judge ourselves on while our kids are in school. Can we retain them, particularly from the first year to the second year? Will they persist throughout that 4 to 6 year life cycle? And once they're done, are they progressing, which is not only placement, but progressing in their respective fields, whether that be employment or grad school. And while to be honest, our real only kind of public factoid is around career placement, 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months after graduation. I certainly would welcome more factoids, both qualitative and quantitative, that get at that. On the other side of that, though, I used to do communications for Bank of America during the financial crisis many years ago. And one of my responsibilities was corporate reputation. So we did some analytical assessments around perceptions of change for employers. And customers and clients had 3 responses back. We'll know you changed when you do what you say you're going to do, provide the products and services you say you're going to do. You are. Second, when you do more than philanthropy around issues that we care about in our communities. So not just philanthropy, but utilizing your core framework to better the communities where you're in. And the final one was when you look like the communities you serve up and down the organizational hierarchy. And I think if corporate partners in higher ed started to think through sort of what the inputs are and what the outputs are expected to be together, we could actually develop some joint metrics that could get at quality and return on investment.
All super points. Anybody else add to that, Jim or Jane?
I'd love to be able to have colleges have access to wage record data for their students, because right now when they do surveys, the only thing they have is self-attestation. And sometimes people exaggerate a little bit and they think they're doing, the colleges think their graduates are doing better. Giving them access to wage record data would be really helpful, both in terms of informing them about which programs were producing the best financial outcomes for their students. This would all be, quantitative measures, but then they could develop surveys to see about the qualitative stuff. They could get to these folks and say, I see you're making $75,000 a year. How are you doing? How's that benefiting you and your community? I think that would get us a lot better data, and I don't see any harm in it at all.
Yep. Yeah, because Jane, you know this research well, but what people start to realize is that there's more program level variation within a university than there is necessarily across institutions. And so not only does it help a student think more about a particular institution, but very specifically about certain programs and majors. And so it really does shed a lot of light on things. And obviously not every student is purely trying to maximize earnings, but that's a big part of the equation. And, it's helpful to kind of understand that. So, I know there's a lot of efforts we were talking about on a panel I was on last week that are pushing states and federal collaboration to make this data more available, right? It's a big hairy mess in terms of where all of it sits and the permissions to share it. But there's a lot of work happening on that front. And in the coming years, at least the consensus on this panel last week was that public universities for sure are probably going to be requiring the release. I mean, they'll be required to have that data available. And then if they have it, right, you would presume that the privates are going to have to follow in some way, or they're just, they're not going to be kind of in the comparative game in an interesting way. So I think that's on the way based on some of the prognostications about that sharing of the data. So it could be some really good outcomes there. But Jim, anything else you'd add to that? And then I'll move on to the next question.
No, I think the ROI question is a great question. And, I do think that many of the data points and measures that have already been shared are relevant. I don't know how to, pull the calculus together to figure out how to truly be able to define what value and return actually looks like for everyone, because I do think it's differentiated, but it's something we got to get our heads around.
Yeah, one of the other questions says, you mentioned early on the need to introduce first generation students to the idea of being a professional. And they ask, what are some of the institutions are doing that? How are you instilling professional practices and an ability to navigate professional situations?
So look, we are all thinking about that all the time in the higher ed space. So the prescriptions I have at Delaware State aren't going to be all that different, I don't think, than a lot of my colleagues. But what I will say is for us, given our population, the earlier we start that process, the better. So we do some things, right? The university seminar, we dedicate to professional development, sort of the table stakes of that. And then we have something called Deep Day every year. That is an executive exchange program. So it is not a career fair. It is about 40 employers, about 800 of our students engage both formally and formally throughout the day. Some of that is employer to students and seminars around how to navigate a corporate setting. Some of that is students back to employers around what they will be looking for as their future workforce. And then at the end of the day, we have a business case competition that is completely run by the students and faculty. And that has merited significant results for us as well. And then backing up as we continue throughout the process, a lot of what we do is wrap our advisors around our first years right at the start of the program, and then pass them off to their what they call professional advisors in their junior and senior year. So you're thinking about what their core needs are. We have a lot of students who need broader wraparound services in those first 2 years, and then building some discipline as they navigate into the professional setting.
Brandon, you earlier brought up co-op, and I think one of the things that we could all steal from the co-op programs is they have a sponsor, a faculty sponsor, who oversees them when they're on co-op. They don't go to visit them like a clinical rotation in nursing or teaching, but they keep in contact with them by phone or when they come back to campus, and they have a continuous improvement loop. So they basically say, when I went into X and was there for 6 months, I really didn't know anything about these things. And then the faculty is able to hear that, and the administration, and put those things, if they're doing their job well, back into the program, so that the next generation that goes out in the next semester or the next year has had the advantage of having instruction in those areas. I think those continuous improvement loops are really important, whether you're co-op or anything else. Bringing back people after they get their first professional job and say, what was the biggest aha moment? What was the biggest thing you saw that you really learned while you were at, Delaware State or Boston College or wherever, University of Chicago, wherever it is, And then what were the things that you wish you had had in your coursework? Because I think those really are very telling. Those are real students coming back who want to give back to the institution. And I think they could be used really in a great way.
Yeah, I mean, the themes of pulling these experiences earlier in the college process and having reflective practices that can be embedded in curricular and other non-curricular programmatic structures across the institution make an awful lot of sense. And one of the new innovations that I've been working on that we're rolling out in partnership with Wake Forest is a shared services model for career centers. And in simple terms, it's going to give students access to industry and role specific experts, right? As opposed to, generalist advisors, right? And on the front end, it's going to be sessions for students where they don't know what financial services is or consulting or whatever the industry is, and they want to understand what do people do in these roles? What is this industry all about, right? As kind of a precursor to it. And on the other end, those who know closer to where they're trying to go, very specific advice. What kinds of things should I know to be smarter in an interview process? How can I get wise about the industry? So, there's a lot of good things happening, but the theme, I think, is pulling it earlier in the experience, right? Even thinking about pre-matriculation, students before they even show up and think about a major, sending them things that they can do over the summer on their way into college, right? Where they can kind of explore different career themes or different job opportunities. We've got a lot of ways that we can scale these things. And then, of course, there's the media experiences of co-op and internship. And then adding some reflective feedback, type of component to it. Those are game changers in terms of the long-term success and trajectory of students. To give you a fine data point on that, students in college who say they had a job or internship where they were able to apply what they were learning in the classroom, right? Some synergy between the traditional academic work and that work experience are twice as likely to be engaged in their work, whatever that work is, over their lifetime. So these are really important things that, if we do, we can really move the long-term trajectory for students. So that's an encouraging part of it, even though scale is always our great challenge in all these things.
Yeah, and if I might, I just want to amplify a point I made earlier. I think early intervention is the key here, and earlier exposure. And as I talked about a few moments ago, it's programs like our Tech Talent Lab program that gets to middle schoolers and high schoolers before they go to college. So they're exposed to these opportunities where professional career paths may open for them that they hadn't even thought of at that age. I think the earlier you get to them, the better. I mean, anecdotally, I was a first generation college student, and it was a peer. It was a college classmate that pulled me into some spaces that I didn't know existed, that helped me prepare for professional opportunities after I graduated, because the university didn't provide that. So I'm not a student services expert, but there may be something there as well, working with peer networks and having students team up and buddy up with others who are exposed and have been exposed to those opportunities.
Yeah, we got time for one last question. We've got about 2 minutes left. I'll throw this one because it's pretty specific, I think, to Tony. But they ask, can you touch on how university alumni can be involved? Is there anything your institutions are doing to activate those stakeholders to support career readiness? So obviously, I'll lead off with you, Tony, but Jim and Jane, if you want to add things, that'd be terrific.
Look, one of the things I've learned in my young tenure as a university president is you got to be open to all things and see what sticks. And we had a student, actually Miss Delaware State University, come to us and say, look, we got to find ways to be connected more to our alum. And I have this thought, as virtual thought. She called it DSU Connect. She got connected with our greater New Jersey chapter. There was an IT professional there. And they built a network, a virtual network called DSU Connect, where current students and alum can get connected, share information, get mentorship, create new opportunities as it relates to career development. And we're a 5,000 person institution with about 25,000 alum. We already have, this just started during the pandemic. We already have 3,000 alum and students on DSU Connect. So it really was about being open to it, we put university support behind it to make it a more robust platform. But I do think that one alum that really care about your institution, they're hungry to get involved, and so are students to be connected to those folks. So trying to find that's the stickiness between the two is something I know Jim thinks about for a living. But I try to spend time thinking about it relative to what that will mean for the career exploration for the student, and the satisfaction that the alum are going to get by seeing somebody that came from a very similar experience that they came from, went to this institution, and now want to do better for themselves and their families.
Yeah, and I'll just pile on Tony there. Alumni, we got to remember, especially public university alumni, many of our first generation graduates, they love alma mater. I think we could try to debate whether or not the experience was positive or led to career advancement. But in most cases, you could say that higher education changes one station in life, and I think that our alumni are examples of that, and we need to take advantage of that. They want to be involved. Digital strategies, multi-channel marketing strategies need to be more part of our thinking, not just we can't. University colleges used to frown at the M word. You can't market, right? Well, shame on us if we don't, because we have an obligation and a responsibility to engage our alumni so they can be those champions for alma mater. And we want everybody to have a lifelong relationship with alma mater. And so in my work, I try to tell our development team members to be mindful of that. So, you're just not knocking on the door asking for a gift. There are a lot of ways we can be engaged and give back, and we need to make sure we express our appreciation for those non-philanthropic returns and investments.
And I would just go a step further, Brendan. Brandon, I would say sponsorship. I love mentorship. There's nothing against that, but it's what makes the Ivies the Ivies. If you graduated from Harvard, everybody who works in your company who's a Harvard grad helps you push up the ladder. Let's make that same thing happen. Let's not be ashamed of saying, I'm a Dell State graduate. I see you are too. Come to this meeting with me. I think we have to promote that with our alums from all colleges, particularly, I taught at a minority serving institution when I was at Temple. You should never be ashamed to say one Temple grad to another, come to this meeting and let me give you a hand up.
Sponsorship's a great word. Go ahead, Tony. Yeah.
I'm going to say I put DSU Connect in the chat if anybody wants to take a look at it.
Oh, good.
Terrific. Yeah, and sponsorship is a great way to, I think, end our conversation. We're about a minute over today. First of all, Tony, thank you. Jim, thank you. Jane, thank you. Thanks to our partners at AAC&U and AGB, and thanks to all of you who tuned in today. This will be recorded. Folks want a recording of it and didn't get it within the next day or two, let us know. And I really appreciate the time and energy you've all put into this. Thanks for your great leadership, and I'll look forward to following all the great activity that you're all involved in. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.